Okay, class. Hopefully you can hear me a little bit better with the improved microphone and sound and all that stuff. So I want to apologize for the late upload. I know I didn't upload on Tuesday. I did not receive my new microphone until yesterday, but then it was a little late by the time I got home from work to record, and then I had some issues setting it up. I'm not that tech savvy. I pretend to be, but I'm not really. So, anyways, let's go ahead and get into the lecture. This is going to be a long one because we have to cover several things. Um, the two main things we're going to cover is uh, modes of appealing to your audience, right, through advertisement, because that's what the media analysis is going to cover. And I'll have the media analysis assignment sheet online, and we'll also take a look at it um, by the time we're done talking about these things. Okay, so with that being said, there's also going to be an opportunity for extra credit, and I'll bring that up again towards the end of the presentation. But for now, what is ethos, pathos, and logos, right? These are the traditional rhetorical methods for appealing to an audience, right? So the way you appeal to them is by um, either establishing some credibility, uh, using emotions or connecting to their emotions, and or providing a logic or sound reasoning as to why they should either listen to you, or in the case of advertisements, why they should buy the product. So we're going to cover that um, individually, right? We'll take a look at them individually, and we'll look at an example and say why or how ethos is being used. Now, this is going to be important because the essay assignment itself is going to be require that you analyze a commercial, meaning it's either going to be a 2 3 minute commercial that you're going to take a look at, and you're going to talk about where and how they use ethos, pathos, and logos. But because it is an analysis essay, you're going to try and decide, does it succeed at its intended goal, or does it fail, and if so, where does it succeed, where does it fail, and ultimately where does that put the commercial? It can do both, right? It can succeed at some things and fail at others, and then ultimately you want to render a verdict if this is if the commercial is a good commercial or bad commercial, simply put, right? So with ethos, the appeal to credibility, you're going to appeal to your audience by establishing credibility through the company or the self, right? And companies do this by either hiring a celebrity or an athlete, right? If you're in the market or you're thinking about buying an energy drink, then if they use a celebrity that you consider to be hardworking and really a top tier athlete, right? And that person is then drinking this energy drink, it kind of lends a little bit of credibility in the fact that you are more likely to buy that energy drink because A, you're a fan of this athlete, and B, if it's good enough for them, then you want to also, uh, it would be good enough for you as a fan. And the same for celebrities, right? Celebrities can work in a couple different ways, though, right? One is an outspoken advocate of certain things. For example, if you were to take a look at Sarah McLachlan in a commercial, for example, a pet adoption commercial, then she has um, a little bit of personal history and involvement with adoption agencies and uh, advocating against animal abuse. So you know that she really does care about animals, and that lends that commercial a little bit more authority because she's sticking up, or she's lending her voice to this organization. Or in some cases, they'll literally use a celebrity for their appearances, right? So a toothpaste commercial might use um, a celebrity that's known for having a great smile, right? And all they do is they brush their teeth and then they check their teeth, and then they smile at the in the mirror, right? Which is then going to elicit a response from the viewer, right? You're like, wow, this person has a great smile. They use this toothpaste. Their teeth are all white. Maybe I should try it, right? You don't necessarily have to buy in 100%, but it's going to at least appeal to you enough to say, maybe I should try it, right? And that's what celebrities and athletes bring to it. Now, sometimes they will have people in a commercial advertising or advocating for a product or organization, but they're not necessarily a celebrity, right? But they will present themselves as what we call a noble profession, meaning, you'll see a soap commercial that shows a firefighter just getting home and he's covered in soot and all this grime from fighting fires. This person is then establishing himself as a credible source because he's in a public service role, right? That means that he appears to be a firefighter, and we tend to hold those people in public service positions at a higher standard, right? We say, we respect police officers, firefighters, military, or any sort of EMT or medical service provider. Because of the service they provide, we tend to hold them in higher esteem. So when we see a firefighter getting home covered, in soot from a terrible fire that he was just fighting in, battling in, and then he starts to wash all that away, then we're like, okay, yeah, this guy's a hard worker. We know that, what it takes for him to be a firefighter, and he's really selling the product because it's getting him completely clean. And then there's usually a scene where he's all like comfortable and just clean, and so he's looking fresh, and that then also appeals to the product's credibility, right? Saying, here's what we do, here's what we have done, and here's how we can help this person. So the figure themselves is lending authority through their role, or the role they're presenting. But in some cases, they might actually have a history in that role, right? And so when the person has a history in that role or that position, then it also lends more of a legitimate appeal to their credibility. For example, if we were to talk about political figures, one of the things that they'll always mention is, I served in the military from this year to this year, or I am, a Vietnam veteran. Maybe not so much anymore, as they're getting older and older, and probably falling out of public service, or at least political service. But with that sort of personal background, that history they have, they're already appealing to most people, right? So when we find out a politician has military and service background versus a politician in that same field or that same party who doesn't, then we're more likely to lean favorably to a person who has that military experience, because we know the sacrifice, and especially if they fought in a war, or in the case of like John McCain before he passed, was a prisoner of war, meaning that he withstood some of the horrendous treatment that prisoners of war did. And so when he came back and he became a political figure, it gave him a lot of credibility, because of the things that he had experienced, and came back still to serve the U.S., right? So in some cases they have that history. Also, in relationship to products, right? If a commercial is trying to sell a service, for example, car maintenance and things like that, we're not going to really trust it if they just have a random person who says that the company knows what they're doing. But if they have a mechanic who's talking about their years of experience and servicing on vehicles, right, especially if they're in a specialty field, such as performance parts, things like that, then we're more likely to trust them for that specific service, if that's what we're looking for, right? Last, the thing that companies often do to try and appeal to you is they will present you with their awards, right? And this is usually for product quality, or if it's an organization for services they've provided, right? And so if we think about vehicles, often they're going to talk about this car won this or that JD award in this year, or they'll say this make, right, this is like Ford or Chevy or Honda or whatever, had the highest overall score in safety. And so, and they were awarded that that safety award by JD Power and Associates, or whatever the organization is. Then they're establishing credibility by saying, here's what we do well, and here's why you should care about us, right? Because we have the most stylish vehicle, we have the safest vehicle, we had a 5-star crash test rating vehicle, right? Things like that. They're going to present it because they're trying to get you to trust them in that way through the awards they won. And so that is how they establish credibility. Okay, so now let's take a look at an example. Here, there's a couple things that are going on, right? First, it says 448,000 owners spoke. JD Power listened, right? So this is this was voted on by vehicle owners, specifically those of Chevy, and JD Powers has awarded them. Now, we don't know what these awards are specifically, right? We can't zoom in enough to see the specificity of those awards. But the fact that they have about 12 or 13 of them on the screen is an impressive feat itself, right? They're not concerned with telling you what the awards are for. They're just concerned with showing you the amount, right? So it doesn't really matter. They're kind of putting it out there saying that we are the highest awarded vehicle line, and then they're showing you the vehicles that they've been awarded for, right? So in this case, that's front and center. That's the intent of this advertisement. Now there's a lot of things going on in the background, right? We have the cityscape, right? With the sun setting, meaning it's going to be nighttime, implying nighttime in a city often implies partying and a lively atmosphere, right? So there's a little bit more implications, things that we can derive from it, but for the most part, they're saying we have all these awards and this is why you should buy from us, right? And so they're establishing and heavily establishing credibility in that front, right? So let's go ahead and move on to Pathos. Now this is the appeal to emotions, right? And so usually they'll use visual elements to appeal to those emotions, right? Things like color and staging and all that stuff. But for the purpose of people, when we see them, you're going to want to pay attention to the sort of relationships they're establishing, because that then elicits an emotional response from us, right? If we see people that are in a romantic relationship and they're all going to like a amusement park, right? Then we see a couple in an amusement park having fun. That creates two things, right? That's going to create a desire for either that type of relationship if you don't have one, or if you are in that sort of relationship, it's going to create a desire to have that sort of fun and joyous experience. But I mean, there's all sorts of emotions that commercials can appeal to, right? They can appeal through guilt, right? Some pet adoption companies will show you animals in terrible conditions because they're trying to guilt you, right? You see these poor puppies in cages, and most people's natural response, I should say, is to feel sadness and a desire to help, right? That's sort of your guilt playing at you. Or there's other emotions that they can appeal to, right? If it's a fun, exciting environment and it's trying to show you how fun things can be, it's appealing to your sense of fun and your emotions of joy and happiness, right? You want to have that sort of fun, especially like I said, at a theme park. You'll see a bunch of kids having fun, and even if you're not a child, it still kind of awakens those feelings of wanting to have fun. And other than that, I mean, there's always strong emotions of nostalgia. That means that they'll show you something, or they'll take a retro approach to their commercial, and that immediately puts people in a sense of nostalgia, meaning that they're remembering fondly something that is older, that would have been around when they were younger, and that sense of nostalgia makes them long for the good times, right? The things that they consider were great back in the day. And so they can do that in a lot of different ways, but usually, yeah, there'll be some sort of retro environment. If you look at some of Marvel's films that have succeeded recently, specifically like Thor and Guardians of the Galaxy, well, I guess not so recent, but the things that have helped them succeed, where Thor used to be a pretty dark film series in 1 and 2, they came in with the third one, and they used music, and specifically a lot of like retro music, in the same way that Guardians of the Galaxy did. And that helped them succeed because the music itself has a strong connection to a nostalgic feeling, right? And people who are older fans would remember when that specific Led Zeppelin song, or what's his name, David Hasselhoff song was on, right? And they immediately have that sense of joy, like the first time they heard it, when they were happy hearing it, or other emotional connections to it, right? Maybe it's something they stumbled across while they were digging into some older music, and they really dug it, but it's already has that connection to joy and enjoyment that they experienced before, and that's how those films really succeeded, right? Strong emotional storytelling, at least as far as the Guardians of the Galaxy, but also music to amp up the level of connection to it through nostalgia. But anyways, last and but not least, the thing that you should always be paying attention to, whether it's a still image or a commercial, is body language and facial expressions, right? Sometimes they'll show their expressions right on their face, and that's what they want you to experience, right? Whether it's in a security commercial where a person's expressing anxiety through their face, that's what they're trying to express to you, right? You should be afraid of the potential of your house being broken into, and that's what security systems are going to do, right? They offer protection from that, and so they'll show people who have anxiety of it happening, and then they'll show people who are confident once they have that that security system, to show you that if you don't have a security system, you should be afraid, but once you get it, you will have the confidence of knowing that your family is secure, right? And so always pay attention to those body language, facial expressions, things like that, so that we can draw on the emotions that they're using and they're trying to relate to you, right? So as I said, humans are naturally mostly empathetic, and so when we see a person crying, we tend to get sad for them, or if we see someone happy, then we get excited for them as well, and things like that. So here's a pretty good example of pathos in use, right? Now we see this person on the top left smiling. He's happy with this little cat, and the cat's doing a little turnaround look at the camera. Then there's a young girl who's petting two animals, right? So she seems to be pretty happy. But the one that's the biggest one is going to be where the lady is laughing because the puppy is licking her in the face. And all of these things are going to then elicit emotional responses, right? You're going to be like, oh, how cute these animals are, and you're going to kind of like feel this sense of want and or like love for them, right? A slight sense of love. And then you also see how the people are interacting with their animals, and there's going to be a sense of desire for that same experience, right? You want a puppy to lick you in the face, or you want to hold a kitty, or you want to have a couple pets that you can just kind of like relax on the couch with. All of that is going to create a sense of want through the emotions they are eliciting, right? Happiness, compassion, friendship, and maybe even the sense of softness to the touch, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the appeal to logic. So literally this just means, why is it logical or to purchase this item or to join this organization or group? And a lot of times they're going to appeal through the use of data, right? So they're going to provide statistics, percentages, charts, graphs, or facts. And these data points are all going to try and sell you on a product, right? They'll say 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Listerine for what's it called, tooth plaque, etc. And so when they're doing that, they're saying this group of people who are establishing some credibility through their professions, dentists, right? So that's a little bit of credibility. And then they're giving you a percentage saying that these people who are credible in their field, 4 out of 5 of them say this product is a must use. And so all of a sudden, you as a viewer or the audience or the recipient of the commercial, right, the information that you're getting from that commercial, suddenly you're more inclined to say, wait a minute, if dentists suggest this, then, and they know what they're talking about, 4 out of 5 of them, then that means there's an 80% chance that I should be using this product, right? Other than that, they will appeal through their product's history, right? So companies can establish a history of service, right? They'll say this product was established in 1928, and we've been serving the U.S. since then. And so that in itself creates some logical appeal, right? You'll say, well, yeah, that makes sense. If they've been in business for almost 100 years, then chances are they know what they're doing and they're good at what they're doing. And lastly, when they're referring to locality, right? So sometimes you'll see a commercial for Chico's Tacos, and they'll say 6 convenient locations, or 5. I forget how much they're down to now. But there'll be like 5 convenient locations, and they'll list all those locations. So that way, the chances are, if you are hungry and you then get the urge to go somewhere to eat, and you see that there's a Chico's on Montana right down the street, then chances are you're gonna be like, well, yeah, let's go to Chico's. It's really close and convenient, right? Or in some cases, it's not that close and convenient, but in comparison to other things, it is, right? So For example, when we hear about like a Wet and Wild Waterland commercial, I think that's what it's called. Um, they'll always reference Anthony Exit Zero, right? Which is pretty far for most people, especially if you live on the east side. But compared to a Schlitterbahn, which you'll have to travel to San Antonio, or any other sort of large aquatic amusement park or amusement, you're not going to find anything closer. So it serves two purposes, right? Their location, it's saying here is where you can find us. So they're giving you that information to locate them. And it's also saying like it's here in the El Paso area, and so you have access to it. You have the opportunity to go, and it's in the grand scheme, it's not that far, right? So consider how they use those appealing those logic points. So here I've provided a couple of examples, right? L&J Cafe, also called the old place by the graveyard, right? That was their catchphrase back in the day, and they'll say they were established or in El Paso tradition since 1927, and they'll show you all the Ford Model Ts and everything lined up around it, and how popular it is. So this is working in two fronts, right? They're establishing a logical connection by saying we've been open since this time, and they're still open. So now you as an audience or the viewer of this commercial must think, well, like that's a long time. That's almost 100 years that they've been open. Maybe I should try this place out because A, it has that longevity, and B, they must be pretty good at what they do. And then there's a sense of nostalgia, right? This kind of like emotional connection to like, whoa, like back in the almost Wild West days when you see these all these old school cars, and even the color of the photo, how it's all faded and grayed out. I mean, they didn't have color back then, but still that color scheme itself, the gray and white, is appealing to a sense of nostalgia, this idea of like back in the day, right? Now this is before anybody here's time, mine included. I may be an old man, but I'm not that old, and it's still kind of appealing to this like the good old days, right? This especially if we consider the year 1920, right before the Great Depression. This was kind of like the swingingest time to be alive, and so it has that sort of appeal to it. Most people are gonna be like, yeah, this must be a legitimate place, and then they want to go to it. Next to that, we have the wireless coverage plans, right? So if this is an advertisement for Verizon, and they're using graphs, or at least these presentations of the US, and to show a coverage so that we can see in a visual sense the amount of 4G network coverage in comparison to the others, right? So of course Verizon is their little outline of the US is almost completely red, where AT&T is second with a large portion of the west, right? Rocky Mountain area, pretty much being the white part, and then of course less for Sprint, and even less or barely less, maybe even a little bit more than Sprint, is T-Mobile. And so while they're not giving you a percentage per se, they are showing you in a graph how much they cover versus others. And then if we were to read the text, it says network is 100% 4G LTE, meaning that anywhere there's Verizon, there's 4G coverage, right? And so then they're providing a statistic or a percentage, right? 100%, which is also going to try and sell you 600 cities, another data point that they're trying to sell you on. And it covers 98% of Americans, another percentage, right? So they're really throwing all these facts and data points at you to try and get you to buy into Verizon as the best network. Now, whether it is or isn't depends on the person's experience with them. So I wouldn't say one way or another, but if we were to believe this information here and how they're presenting it, then they're really appealing to our logic, right? It only makes sense that if we want the best coverage and the most coverage anywhere in the United States, through this example that they're providing, then Verizon would be the obvious choice, right? And so those are going to be some of the points that you can reference when you're talking about your media analysis paper. But sometimes it's a little bit harder, and when we have still images, we're going to need more talking points for them. That's related to the extra credit, but we can go ahead and talk about any additional information if we decide to discuss design, right? If, you should mention it within your paper as well. But there are a lot of elements of design in visual media that can help us derive even more meaning from our present or from our commercial, right? So depending on who you ask, there's less than 7, there's more than 7, sometimes as many as like 10 or 12 elements of design. But that's because they kind of put some in together, they'll lump some together, and then they'll kind of like chop one into several parts to make it even more. But for now, we'll go ahead and just stick with the 7 elements of design, right? That's going to be lines, shapes, colors, typography, texture, space, and value. And these are going to be things that commercials will use to appeal to its audience, right? And so when we think of lines, we're thinking of points that are being connected, or at least an area that's being created, right? Even if we were to take a look at here where it says lines, this has no outline, but there's a clear line designating between the pink area and the white area, right? And that line is establishing a design, or it's connecting all that's inside it under the same color, and it's pushing everything else away. And so additionally, it's helping to create an intended design, or like mental connection point, meaning that it looks like a brush stroke, and that's the intent, right? So that line and these divisions between the colors is helping to create an understanding and give meaning to this specific section here, right? So that's what they do. They connect points. They also create division and hierarchy, or areas of focus. In this case, it's doing all of the above, right? It's dividing the pink area from the white area. It's creating a hierarchy, meaning that your eyes are naturally going to focus on this pink area first with what it's saying, right? Here it just says lines, and then your eyes are then going to move to the next part, right? So it creates a little bit of motion through those focal points, and it tells you focus here, then go here, and it creates a sense of organization, or it helps define an intended mess, right? Like, this is not necessarily organized as far as the design of the brush stroke, but it's done in a way to give meaning, right? That we know this is a brush stroke, and therefore the mess that these lines are creating serve a purpose to our understanding of it. Next, we have shapes, right? And shapes can come in many forms. Specifically, we are referring to 2D shapes, right? They're going to be flat. Any 3D shape that has volume is going to fall under that one, that point, volume. And so we're talking about 2D shapes, and specifically there's 2 kinds of shapes that you'll see most often, right? There's organic shapes, meaning that you'll see symbols or outlines of leaves, trees, maybe even the silhouette of a mountain or a cactus in the background. And these are going to carry some natural connections to your experience with them, right? So if you see a cactus and you've been hiking through the deserts in Arizona, right, where they have the large saguaros, you're going to have this sort of connection to it, right? You're going to think of the desert. You're going to understand sort of the beauty it presents. Or if you have a negative experience with it, like you didn't like the hike, you're dehydrated and you're mad about it, then you're also going to understand that the desert's not necessarily the most hospitable place, right? So you're going to have this connection to it. And maybe you'll have both, right? That you have appreciation for the beauty of it, but an understanding that it's going to have a little bit of danger to it. And so shapes that are organic have those implied connections to nature, and the nature that it's connected to has its own set of emotional connections and experiences tied to them, right? And so they'll appeal to their reader or their viewer in those ways. Next, we have geometric shapes, right? These are going to be things that are very rarely found naturally in nature. We're talking about circles, squares, triangles, right? And anything in between there, rhombi, diamond, whatever you want to call them. And those shapes, because they have such sharp edges usually, except if we're talking about a circle, they're going to draw your attention to them and carry with them some meaning. For example, a diamond, or a triangle, I should say specifically, a triangle, we've been conditioned to view as a warning, right? So we see yield signs on the road, and we know like we need to pay attention to it, because if not, then we might get in an accident. um, or some of those hazard signs that are attached to, trailers, will be a big old triangle with an exclamation point, because they're trying to say the material within here is dangerous, so please stay back, right? And so when we see triangles, we associate it with like alertness or a need to be aware. Where squares, not necessarily so much, but they do often have a connection to a very strict or rigid form, right? A square, equal on all sides, sharp corners, and therefore we tend to think of them in a sense of authority, or completed information. Where a circle, if it's used, has a sense of comfort in it, meaning that it's a completed image. It's whole, and it's not sharp or aggressive really in any way. And so circles tend to provide a little bit of comfort. Now, if you have circles within circles within circles, then you start to develop additional meaning, right? For example, the idea of a target or a bullseye is a circle with another circle and another circle around it, and that has its own meaning, right? It can imply danger, but it can also imply a goal, or that point that you want to get to. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to color. Now, color is, in my estimation, the most important factor for dictating or appealing to your emotions, right? We associate color with emotions in almost everything we do, right? If someone's sad, we can say, "Why are you so blue?" And therefore the color blue has that association to being sad, or a little bit of depression. Where if you ask somebody if they're seeing red, or some people will say, "I saw red," meaning that they've got to a point of anger where they just lost control, right? They just raged out, and that's kind of the color connection to it, right? Red. But there's always sort of two sides to it, where red can represent rage. It can also represent passion or love. And blue, while it represents sadness, can also represent trust in the things we believe in, right? And that's why there's this sort of use of those colors in the flags, or certain companies will use them in certain ways. If you were to look at any home security commercial or logo, everyone, Brinks, ADT, there's another one I can't think of, but these three major home security, their logos are all going to be in blue, because they want to establish a sense of trust, and even that sense of security through that trust. And the same is true when we consider police, right? Their uniforms are often blue. They're called the men in blue, because they're expected to carry a level of trust with them, right? When we're supposed to put that trust in them. And so that's how colors can work in multiple sides. Also consider the hues that are being used. Now, a hue is a group of colors within the same family, right? So there's different intensities of red, right? You can have a really dark red, which is often going to be an intense rage or anger. And if we get to the lighter reds, maybe even into the pinks, then we can more associate that with love, right? And maybe both at the same time. So why are they using certain hues? Ask yourself that, so that way you can get an idea of why they're sticking to this particular group of colors, and what's the emotions associated with them. Other than that, of course, colors can be used to highlight or create backgrounds, and that's going to emphasize something in the forefront, right? If something is highlighted, then they're saying pay attention to this first, right? And the color around it is also going to have that emotional connection to it, where the background's going to have different colors, and might show something. For example, if there's a light image on the front and the background is all darkened and or black, then there could be a connection to, like, trust this because what's out there is unknown and or scary, right? So consider how they're using colors and where they're using it to create and derive meaning that you can use to explain within your media analysis essay. Also, consider what type of typography they're using, right? So this is considered the font, right? Usually it's going to have some emotional connection. If you see, for example, the retro style, again, it's going to appeal to your nostalgia. So it's going to have an implied feeling of like longing for something that happened in the past. Things you can consider are like Times New Roman, or even the Old English font that carries that sense of nostalgia with it. Or in some of you who have messed around on Word document might have found like the Chiller font, which is sort of like a horror type font because it has jagged lines and they're kind of like maybe a little bit faded around the edges, right? They're not just one solid stroke. There's sort of a little bit of faded and jaggediness to it, and that carries with it this sense of horror, right? This sort of horror feel to it, because sometimes those jagged edges can be sharp and unapproachable, and if it's in a red font, then of course it has a connotation of blood and things like that with it. So with whatever type of font they're using, even if it's just casual or it appears to be normal, then it's trying to sell you as being just that, right? Medication will often use a font that is not stand out because they want you to think, hey, it's perfectly fine to take this medication, things like that. However, how they use the font, it can also increase the area of focus, right? So if we're sticking to that medication, they'll put the name of the medication in perhaps a colored font, and it's going to be large, so that way we know and we keep in mind the name of this medication when we go to the doctor or whatever, and we can ask for it. And it's also going to pull our attention, right? Because the larger the font, the more weight it's going to have, as far as what we call visual weight, right? So our eyes are going to be drawn to the darker, the more bold, and the larger fonts that we see on a commercial. For example, if you were to see a Nike commercial, you have the swoosh, and then you'll always have the logo "Just Do It" next to it or under it, and usually just an equal size to the swoosh, because they want to emphasize like this is what you should be paying attention to, and it carries more weight with it. Usually because they'll use a font that stands out from the background, right? If it's a black background, they'll use white font, and it's going to be large and it's going to draw your eyes to it. Other than that, it might have some direction with it. So what I mean by direction is, we read in the United States, we read from left to right, and then we go down from top to bottom. And so when there's text on a screen, you're automatically going to read it. At least again, if the commercial is in English and here in the United States, then you're going to read it from left to right, and then if there's lines underneath it, you're going to go from top to bottom, right? So it's literally telling your eyes to follow along in this order to this order, and then sometimes it'll lead you to the next point or the next area of focus within the advertisement. So in that way, when you pay attention to typography, it's going to give you, or your eyes specifically, direction to follow. And last is instruction, and that's not like direction. I know they sound the same, right? Direction and instruction, but instruction is literally, it's going to tell you to do something, right? Nike says just do it. It's a command. It's telling you get out there and enjoy life, but make sure you're wearing Nikes when you do it, right? Or if we go back to the idea of a medication commercial, they'll put their medication name in colored font at the top, and it's going to be bright and or stand out, but then they'll have a few lines underneath that says consult your doctor before starting this medication, and that's because they can't legally tell you just start this medication. You can only get this through prescription, meaning that it's been prescribed through the use of a doctor, and they're not advocating for self-medication, right? So sometimes they'll literally tell you this is what you should be doing, right? Hungry, grab a Snickers, right? That's literally telling you if you're hungry, grab this food. Or in this case, it's we want you to buy this product, but you need to talk to your doctor first, right? So they can do any of these things, and that is then going to affect the way we perceive it, the way we respond to the text. It's going to tell us whether we agree or that, or if we are buying into what the product is trying to sell. Next, we have textures, right? The two examples I have here is one looks like a white sheet and the other looks like a cement, just a slab of cement. And they're two very different textures, right? The texture, what we mean by texture is the mental feel of it, because you can't actually feel the screen and get any texture from it. And so what we mean by that texture is the implied feel that it has with it, right? So when we think of this white sheet image, we think of something soft, and then it starts to further develop our understanding of it. Because we think of it as a sheet, we have a connotation to the idea of a bed, right? A nice soft bed. And so the sheet then carries even more softness. Now, if we were just to have a sheet by itself, it's going to be as soft as the thing that it's lying on. Meaning that if you put this sheet on the concrete slab, it would still feel pretty firm. That sheet's not going to do anything. But because of the connotation, the fact that we associate sheets with being on a bed, then it kind of increases the sort of comfort and the softness associated with it, right? And that comfort has other emotional connections, right? We feel calm, or we feel this sort of sense of security for some of us when we get in bed, when we think about our bed. As Drake said, you know, sometimes he feels the idea of love, right? Because he only loves his bed and his mama. So there's this kind of connection to what the bed itself means, and that invokes more emotional responses to the viewer. Whereas the cement it has a different sort of texture. We can imagine the feel of cement. Anybody who's walked on a hot cement or cement on a hot day knows that it's not a comfortable feeling by any means, and there's no give to it, right? It's a really firm, hard, almost undesirable strength, right? Like firmness, right? You don't want the things in your life to be concrete, but if you think about it, the things that are made of concrete also have a sort of sense of dependability or reliability. Foundations of most buildings are made out of concrete, and the things that we want to last a long time are made with concrete foundations or bases. So then when we think about it, there's some sense of dependability, right? This idea of longevity and security in that idea. So it's firm, but it's not necessarily unapproachably firm. It's firm for the purpose of lasting a long time, right? And so we can think about those connotations and connections to it, whatever you've experienced with cement in the past, right? Maybe you've worked on, or you've played on a basketball court out in the park, right? And they're usually just cement slabs with a little bit of painted lines on them. And so it really is up to the viewer sort of to make those connections for them, and then the intent of it. In this case, if we were to put these two textures together, there's going to be a clash, right? Like this sort of dynamic switch from the implied texture of softness and then the firm texture of the cement. But that can also develop sort of the feelings and the intentional switch in comfort from texture to texture, right? You go from the soft texture to hard texture, and maybe the commercial is trying to show you that we are gentle, we're a product that's gentle, but we're firm on whatever else they do, right? For example, germs, right? Maybe if it's a product that talks about stopping the spreading of germs and things like that, whatever it's going to be, consider how they're using textures and the different textures, how they play together, right? Okay. Next we have space. This is not to imply that white space is positive and black space is negative. Both of these, the backgrounds, right? This white background here and this black background here are both considered negative space. And the reason they're considered negative space is because they're unoccupied by an image. The text that we have that says positive, space occupied by central objects, and then negative space can be black, white, but lack a central figure. This text is then the central figure. That's the positive space, right? Because it's taking up some of the what otherwise would be unused space, right? And so positive space, our text, our typography, I should say, but it's also images and or shapes that they use within the advertisement to present an item, object, or idea, and the negative space around it is going to be that area that's unused. When it comes to space, for most advertisements, they're going to want a sense of balance, right? If we look at something and it's balanced, there's a sense of like enjoyment from that. But if we were to look at something that was unbalanced, sometimes it might offend us or make us really think that this was poorly done. For example, if I were to move these positive and negatives all the way to the top of this page and I were to leave the bottom half, if all this down here was empty or negative space, then there would be an unappealing nature to it, right? We would say that this is not well designed, and therefore you wouldn't you would feel less pleased and less likely to believe what is going on within this slideshow presentation, right? Because it wasn't designed well. Not to say that this is an excellent design by any means, right? These are some of the standard designs that they give you with PowerPoint, but at least they're in a way balanced, so it makes it a little bit more appealing. Okay. And so our last one is going to be volume, right? And volume are going to be referencing objects that carry an idea of weight, right? Volume is sort of the size and mass of the image that we get from the advertisement, and also that weight can be increased if it has depth to it, meaning it feels 3D. So if the image itself has a 3D sense to it, then the weight of that object suddenly becomes more tangible, right? It feels heavier in our mind's eye rather than a 2D image. And so also to consider what adds to weight is going to be the lightness or the darkness, as well as the size of the image. So if we were to have for example a little mini Death Star floating in our image here, the fact that we can see it in a 3D model is going to have that weight and volume. And if it were white rather than a darker gray, then it would feel less light, or it will feel less heavy than if it's darker, right? So any sort of model or 3D figure that is going to carry that weight can have its weight adjusted, not even by the size, but also by the darkness of the colors that they're using in that image. And often these 3D images create what's called depth within the image overall. So in here we have the Journal of Molecular Biology, and there's sort of a forefront, there's a medium, and then there's a background. And all this is being used with the help of 3D models, right? This sort of 3D presentation of this molecule. And then there's one in the middle, which is sort of out of range of focus, so it's a little blurry. And then there's the background where you see these sort of helixes really back in the distance and you can't really make out. And so it serves two purposes for the Journal of Molecular Biology. They're showing you exactly what they study, right? Molecules, right? This is obviously a natural molecule of some sort of biological creature thing, whatever you want to call it. And then there's sort of a depth to it, meaning that they study it, and the further you get into that darkness, the more unknown it becomes, right? This background area is darkened because they don't, perhaps you're trying to say they don't have all the answers, but in that darkness they seek the answers, right? And they bring what is unknown, what is blurry, out of focus, they bring it to light, right? So consider how they're using them to create meaning, establish depth, especially when it comes to the volume of the objects that they're presenting you with. And that can really help you get an idea of what it is they're trying to do through the advertisement or the images they're showing you. Right, so that's pretty much it. I feel like we've been going a long time for this one, so I'll go ahead and stop this presentation here. For those of you that did respond to Tim O'Brien, thank you. We'll bring this up on Tuesday of next week. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please do reach out for me. But I do want to show you the assignment sheet, so let me go ahead and bring that up. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the media analysis assignment sheet. So for this one, we can go ahead and ignore the peer review. You all will not be required to have a peer review. However, I will ask that you submit it to the writing center, so that way they can review it for you. But that's going to be the proof of its submission is going to be due at the same time that the final is due. So the final for this media analysis is going to be due on the 14th of October online, right? You'll submit it on Blackboard. As always, it should be 12 point Times New Roman, double spaced. It must include APA cover page, and it should include the 1 through 3 level headings. And this time we're also going to cover the reference page, meaning that there should be a page at the end where you'll give full source credit to the commercial that you're going to be talking about. So overall, for the media analysis, you must analyze a video or image commercial of your choice. You may only choose one commercial. Do not try to analyze multiple. The goal of the analysis is to discuss if the commercial is successful at selling the product, or does it fail to effectively appeal to the audience. Perhaps it does both at some points. It succeeds at some aspects and it fails at others, and that you can also address. In order to discuss its effectiveness, you must address the ethos, pathos, and logos of the commercial, as well as those visual design elements, things like color space, and overall design. Again, this essay must have a minimum of 5 paragraphs, an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and 1 conclusion. Each paragraph is worth 25 points, and your APA format, which includes the reference page, is worth an additional 25 points for a total of 150 points. So any one of those things is missing, you're immediately going to lose 25 points towards the total. Okay, so please make sure that it's all there. Now, for the extra credit, what I'm offering is you can record yourself discussing the commercial and presenting it right. That it means that you'll probably want to attach a PowerPoint or some form of visual related to the commercial that you're going to be talking about, and you can submit that to get additional 20 points towards the essay, or you can add those 20 points to cover 2 missing or low scored weekly assignments, right? So things like the rough draft or the intro and body paragraph, or if you didn't do well on those, you can go ahead and bring those up to a 10 point for both of them, right? So you can max out your points. It's just going to be a few minutes, right? If you want to play your commercial and then discuss it, right? Talk about the ethos, pathos, and logos of it. It's just going to be maximum of 5 minutes. It's just something that's going to help you get a little bit of extra points towards it. And I will open that submission as extra credit to anybody that's interested in it. And again, it won't count against you. It's just going to give you the option of earning up to 20 points to be used on different assignments or wherever you want those 20 points to go to, pretty much. All right. So if you're interested, please get a hold of me. I can provide you more information. And then we can work towards that. But overall, it's just an essay, right? It's going to be about 3 pages long in length total, including a cover page, 4 pages including the reference page, and it should just be about 2 pages including your intro and body paragraphs and conclusion as you analyze and you talk about the effectiveness of a commercial. So first thing I do want you to do is start considering what commercials you want to use. They can be whatever length, right? But if you're going to be presenting it as part of your extra credit, it's not going to count towards that overall presentation length, right? So if you play a commercial that's 5 minutes long, that's not going to give you credit towards that presentation, right? Or that extra credit presentation, I should say. Okay, so again, that's extra credit, but the essay itself is not. This essay is going to be one of your large major essay writing assignments, and it's going to be worth 150 points. So we'll break into it a little bit more starting next week. And all this, you can find this information on Blackboard. All right, so again, if you have any questions, please do reach out to me. Thank you. Have a great day.